Okay, Year 12. I just want to quickly go through with you the lesson for today and what I want you working on this lesson. Obviously, yesterday with Mrs. Ratcliffe, you were working through the possible related text, Please Resist Me. That obviously was to align with some of what we discussed in class last week around the experiences. So we're moving on to consider more closely this week some of Shakespeare's language and also some of his crafting of dramatic features within the play. Now, it's really important to understand that this isn't separate to what we were looking at last week. Obviously, when you're discussing the representation of human experiences in the play, you've got to supplement and support that with some of the analysis of Shakespeare's crafting. Why this is significant and why we do it as a bit of a standalone is you can have a question, obviously, that directs you to focus upon the language. Similarly, you can have a question that directs you to focus upon the experience. What that means is obviously that has to become the primary emphasis in your discussion in an essay, and then you obviously still use the other elements within the rubric to discuss and support your ideas around the question. So this week, obviously, as I said, we're focusing more closely on some of the elements of Shakespeare's language and also some of his dramatic features. So in the booklet, obviously a big one for us to focus on initially, and as we've already started to explore through discussion last week in light of representation of experiences, we're going to start by considering the characterization. It's really important, Year 12, to remember that the characters don't exist outside of the scope of the text. They are crafted by the composer, and that is here obviously Shakespeare, and he's crafting these characters to represent individuals and also collective groups within his society, but also perhaps universally. So obviously I want you to read through these notes on the characters. We're starting with Shylock. He's a very significant crafted character within this text. And you've got there some notes about his character and then a table here that gives you some specific elements around the human experiences and also then some other elements connected to the rubric. So have a read through that. Make sure that you're making some notes for yourself so that you can come back to hopefully discuss that if you need to in terms of an essay response. You've got a question here, and again, it's asking you to focus upon your response to Shylock's character. Okay, so I really want you to start thinking about how you're responding to this characterization of Shylock. The next character, very important as well, Portia. Portia is obviously our strongest female character that Shakespeare crafts in the play. And again, you've got some notes here to read through and then some ideas connected to pieces in the rubric. So read through those and then process that. Then you've got a question here again, considering how Shakespeare's crafting Portia to represent perhaps some of the changes that are occurring within his society, within the Elizabethan world. Next character is Antonio, a little less as we get down the list of characters. Antonio, you've got some quotes and then you've got a question, all right? Same with Bassanio, some quotes and then a question to respond to, and Gratiano. Gratiano is a really interesting character. And we haven't talked a lot about him as yet, but I want you to start thinking around what Shakespeare's representing through his character. Underneath that, you've just got some additional notes on the characters that we haven't then gone through before that and just some key quotes. Again, Year 12, really focus on collecting pieces from the text to use as support for your ideas and your discussion. So these key quotes, you don't need all of them, but make sure you're starting to get and develop some good textual support. I want you to read through that initially. They're your characterization notes, all right? Again, process it, come to some understanding. The next big thing I want you to focus on in terms of language and the way that Shakespeare's crafting is setting, the way that he uses the particular places in this play and the way that he moves between the world of Venice and obviously Belmont, where Portia obviously she lives. So I want you to think about what he's representing through that. You've got some notes there again, just briefly, and then a question, okay? Underneath that, there is just some additional notes that I want you to read through and consider in light of some additional language features. It's really common Year 12 in particularly responses about that are addressing Shakespearean text. There's a bit of a lack of good, meaty analysis of language, all right? So you can't afford to not have a good discussion of Shakespeare's language and the way that he is crafting intentionally his language and his dramatic features to convey ideas to his audience. All right, so you've got some additional notes here to read through and consider. They're just notes out of a crib, so they're very general notes, but I want you to really focus on some good language examples that you can then develop and use in your discussions. There's some that aren't mentioned here, so think about if there's anything additional that you could add to obviously support your discussion, but certainly very importantly is this one of soliloquies and asides, that the way that Shakespeare is crafting his play, whereby the characters at times speak directly to the audience, and that obviously crafts dramatic irony because it's where the audience is in a privileged position. We know more than the characters in the play. Okay, so again, really focus on elements of Shakespeare's language. That should take you a good chunk of time, this lesson. I would imagine I want you to work for the hour or just under an hour now because I've taken some of your time. But give yourself a good chunk of time to work through that today. I'll give you some more time next lesson to really consolidate and really focus on developing some good summary notes for yourselves that's focusing around the language. And then obviously next lesson as well, I'm going to go through how to pull this into the paragraphs that we were talking about last week for human experiences, because don't forget they're due this week to me. All right, so I want you to write 2 paragraphs. You can explore different experiences in each of those paragraphs, but it's using that causation process that we were working through. So I'm going to go through that next lesson with you. I'll scaffold how I want you to put those ideas together in some paragraphs, but ultimately all of these notes, I want you to keep developing and focusing underneath whatever the focus is that you're being directed to respond to, whether that's experiences, whether that's language, whether that's anomalies, paradoxes, and inconsistencies, or whether it's storytelling. They're the main elements of this rubric. Then obviously that becomes the focus and everything else just kind of falls underneath. All right, so next lesson, we're going to go through the paragraphs. This lesson, do as much of this language, reading, summarizing, getting your head around some good, strong examples of Shakespeare's crafting. Okay, that's it for today. Work hard, don't waste time, and keep consolidating Year 12. All right, keep making sure you're on top of things. If you've got any questions, of course, please email me. I'm online to obviously help you while you're working. So reach out if you need something clarified or if you don't understand what you're reading through or working through. And keep going back to your plays, the actual text, because you've got to know your texts, Year 12. Alrighty? Okay, take care. I'll tap in again next lesson. Thanks heaps.